I'm often described as a high-energy individual, and most people want to know why I specialized in hospice and palliative medicine. Even my family could not figure it out at first. They said, "You spent all that time learning to heal people, and now you want to help them die? Or, why would you want to spend so much time with people who are about to die? Isn't it depressing?" Some people seem to think hospice doctors should be serious and talk in a soft voice, but those who are dying do not want that at all. They want to be treated the same as everyone else, as they are the same as everyone else. They want you to joke with them, laugh, and do silly things to amuse them and keep them engaged in life. The terminally ill yearn for these joyful attitudes, as they ultimately grasp the meaning of life and death, and an understanding that this phase of life should be celebrated and honored as the beginning of an awe-inspiring journey, a journey that leads us into the arms of our loving Creator. During medical school, and as an intern, I had to contend with the onset of the AIDS epidemic, and it was devastating. The predictions for the infected population were dire. I gained great respect for the process of death during this time, and I wanted so much to help these souls complete their lives in a joyful way, instead of just trying to help them survive. It was excruciating at times to revive patients who I know wanted to die, but were too incapacitated to express their wishes. I knew there had to be a better way to deal with the futility of this disease, as fighting tooth and nail and forcing patients to endure great pain, just to postpone the inevitable, was inhumane. After all, who were we trying to serve, ourselves or patients? Within a period of a few months, I witnessed an astonishing event that would later not only launch my career into hospice and palliative medicine, but ultimately reveal the answer regarding the futility of medical care. I was an intern working in San Antonio Hospital one full moon night when a fatal head-on collision sent 5 patients to our emergency room. The victims were triaged and the youngest patients with the best chance of survival got the top doctors. For the interim, I was to care for patients with minor problems or patients with the least chance of survival. At that moment, Ricardo, a 82-year-old man, was brought in by the paramedics after collapsing at home during dinner. He was rushed into the trauma room where I promptly initiated cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After the first shock, normal heart rhythm returned. Ricardo turned around slowly, mumbling something about the light and being out of his body. As I worked at stabilizing his heart rhythm, he continued to repeat the sentence, "It felt like a roller coaster ride, it felt like a roller coaster." More alert now, he was able to communicate his symptoms, which included chest pain. I reassured him that the pain medication was given and told him not to worry. To keep him engaged, I asked him to tell me more about his roller coaster ride. Ricardo replied, "I don't know what was happening except that I was flying over my body, and the angels began to show me things I had done in my life." He looked at me, and with elated smile said, "It was so beautiful. God and the angels told me I would survive this." To stop for that brief conversation, he flatlined and was shocked once more with no response. It was not until I injected epinephrine directly into his heart that a cardiac rhythm was obtained. He was rushed to the cardiac care unit where the cardiologists initiated several intravenous antiarrhythmic in an attempt to stabilize his heart rate and rhythm. In the end, Ricardo has suffered a massive heart attack that responded well to the antiarrhythmics, anticoagulants, and angioplasty. While visiting the patients I had admitted the night before, I saw Ricardo waving and signaling to visit him first. I could not believe this man was awake, let alone live. With a radiant smile that appeared to illuminate his whole countenance, he said, "Thank you for helping me." I told him I was so excited he had made a remarkable recovery. He said, "I owe it all to God." "Dr. Lerma, do you remember our conversation about the light and being out of my body?" "Of course I do," I replied. Ricardo continued, "Well, I have a lot of realizations during that time. I guess you can say I negotiated with the angels and God to make things right with my family. You see, Dr. Lerma, I was abusive with my family and friends, and God gave me the opportunity to mend things with my wife. Memorized with his comments, I wondered about near-death stories I heard other doctors discuss and whether they were true or just the brain's response to sudden chemical and gaseous changes. In Ricardo's case, I was sure something miraculous had occurred, but there was no way of knowing. Completely enthralled, I continued my conversation with Ricardo, hoping there was something he would say that would prove his experience. Drive. Lerma, I need your help. I know you don't my story, and in a way, so do I. That is why I need confirmation on whether the spiritual occurrence was real. Before I asked how that could be done, he said, when I was out of my body and floating up above the trauma room, I spotted a 1985 quarter lying on the right-hand corner of 8-foot-high cardiac monitor. It was amidst the dust as if someone had put it there for this very reason. Dr. Lerma, could you please check for me? It would mean so much to me. I was curious and skeptical enough to oblige him, and went to the emergency room with a ladder. I climbed up, with the nurses standing by. They were also curious to know if a patient had really been able to see something while we were bringing him back to life. Heard stories similar to that all the time, but there was usually no way to prove whether they had really seen something or just imagined it. To our total amazement, there was just as he had seen it, and even the year was right: 1985. There seemed no doubt that the only way he could have known it was there was if he placed it there himself, or he saw it as he was floating up near the ceiling, as he described. Still skeptical, I wondered if this man could have put the quarter there, so I checked some of the details, and found there was no way he could have known the quarter was there. It had been years since he had been able to climb a ladder, and he had never worked in construction. I could find no connection with anyone who had worked on the newly built emergency trauma rooms. Was this confirmation that we exist beyond the body? At best, it piqued my interest in the death process, which, ultimately, led me into a career where stories such as this were a rule and not an exception. This book is about ordinary people, in extraordinary situations, who selflessly shared their last days with me, knowing that their stories were going to bring comfort and peace to those who directly or indirectly heard the accounts of an all-loving and righteous God. The heartfelt accounts of God's love as told by a 9-year-old boy, a murderer, a drug user, a Christian minister, an atheist, and a German Nazi are not only mystifying, but healing and uplifting. They all speak of the one God that creates with total love, forever reminding us that everyone on this planet serves a purpose and is unified from the same wholeness, a wholeness that will, in due time, create universal and eternal peace and love. One patient's account reveals how unconditional love and random acts of kindness raise the level of humanity in spiritual growth for our planet and universe. Another patient explains that, as science and spirituality unite, many discoveries will be made, including a protein sequence in DNA that, when activated, will accelerate our progression to peaceful entities. Many of the visions and messages talk in depth about the need for self-love and self-forgiveness in order to have a loving earthly relationship and ultimately a peaceful transition back to God. Some of the people in the book had peaceful transitions and others difficult ones. Nonetheless, the common denominator was their desire to provide for their insight into the mysterious interface between life and death. When I first began to reveal these stories as well as my personal research on the validity of pre-death visions, I faced criticism from and investigations by the medical community. I was compelled to continue my research as well as share the extraordinary tales of comfort and compassion. However, I did this at great peril to my career, truly believing that the messages these stories conveyed were instrumental in providing relief of both patients' and families' spiritual, emotional, and interpersonal pain. The outcomes were simply astounding. Hence, the project of investigating pre-death experiences, PDEs, began. By the time Into the Light was written, I had successfully interviewed more than 2,000 terminally ill patients and recorded more than 500 pre-death experiences. At my core, I am a scientist, and I did not come to the idea of angels and non-physical entities easily. I believed science had not done enough to narrowly define life, so I began with a skeptical view of the seemingly large number of supernatural occurrences that preceded death. When possible, found a rational explanation and most often attributed the patient's visions to their advancing disease, medications, or a complete shutdown of body systems. Nevertheless, the similarity and sheer number of stories, as well as some unexplainable phenomena, began to weigh heavily in favor of something else. I do not attempt to define what that something else is, but simply recount the compelling stories of the terminally ill patients under my care. The religious aspects of the stories come from the individuals and do not necessarily reflect my beliefs, for I am still observing and holding a place of scientific observation and skepticism while considering all of the possibilities. From a place of true compassion, I am presenting these heartfelt and spiritual experiences as inspiration and encouragement for the dying and the survivors of loss, and that includes all of us. My intention is to offer what I have observed and learned from the countless loving patients I had the honor of comforting, and that is the presence of hope, redemption, and unconditional love that exists at the end of our earthly journey. My hope is that the medical industry will embrace this information and gain new understanding of the dying process so as to focus greater attention on the spiritual needs of their patients as they leave this world. The accounts in this book are of hospice patients during their last hours to days before making their final and most sacred journey. Note that, although I use quotation marks to signify conversation between my patients, their families, and me throughout the book, they are actually a mixture of quotations from notes taken while interviewing patients as well as from my memory. Most of the stories explore the mysterious realms of visions, synchronicities, prophecies, and the quantum field of infinite possibilities. Due to the unusually personal nature of the accounts, I have changed names and personal details. I hope you will enjoy and be uplifted by the amazing messages from the angels.